What if everything you've been told about trauma is wrong, and instead of being permanently broken, you're actually far more resilient than you think? In this audiobook summary of The End of Trauma, you'll discover the surprising truth about how the human mind responds to pain, why most people recover faster than expected, and how you can take control of your own healing journey. If you've ever felt stuck in past experiences or wondered whether real recovery is possible, this video will completely change your perspective. Stay with me till the end, and you'll walk away with a powerful new understanding of trauma and practical insights that can help you move forward stronger than ever. In The End of Trauma, the idea of rethinking trauma begins by challenging one of the most deeply rooted beliefs we carry, that traumatic experiences automatically leave us damaged for life. The book argues that this assumption is not only incomplete, but often misleading. Instead of seeing trauma as a permanent psychological scar, Banana presents it as an event that can affect people in very different ways, depending on how they respond, adapt, and interpret what happened. Imagine two people who go through the same painful experience, such as losing a job or facing a serious accident. One person might struggle for years, constantly replaying the event and feeling stuck, while the other slowly rebuilds their life, finds new meaning, and even grows stronger. The key difference is not the event itself, but the flexibility of their mindset and coping strategies. This reframing is powerful because it shifts you from feeling like a passive victim of your past to an active participant in your recovery. The book also highlights how modern culture sometimes unintentionally reinforces the idea that trauma must lead to long-term suffering. From movies to social media, we are often told that healing is always slow, painful, and requires years of struggle. While this is true for some, it is not the universal rule. In fact, research shows that many people naturally recover over time without intensive intervention. Think about a time in your own life when something difficult happened, maybe a breakup, a failure, or a loss. At that moment, it might have felt overwhelming, but as weeks or months passed, you adapted, found ways to cope, and eventually moved forward. This doesn't mean the pain wasn't real, but it shows that your mind has a built-in ability to heal. A relatable example could be a student who fails an important exam. Initially, they might feel devastated and believe their future is ruined. But over time, they reassess their situation, change their study habits, seek help, and eventually succeed. The trauma of failure becomes a turning point rather than a permanent setback. Similarly, someone who experiences rejection in a relationship might first feel broken, but later use that experience to understand themselves better and build healthier connections in the future. These examples illustrate the book's core message. Trauma does not define you. Your response to it does. What makes this perspective especially valuable is its practicality. Instead of asking, "Why did this happen to me?" the book encourages you to ask, "How can I respond to this in a way that helps me move forward?" This subtle shift can change everything. It puts you back in control. You start to notice your own coping mechanisms, your ability to adapt, and your hidden resilience. You begin to understand that healing is not about erasing the past, but about integrating it into your life in a way that strengthens you. To apply this in your own life, start by observing your reactions to stress and setbacks. When something difficult happens, pause and ask yourself, am I assuming this will damage me permanently? Is there evidence from my past that I've handled challenges before? What small step can I take right now to regain a sense of control? Even simple actions, like talking to a friend, reframing your thoughts, or focusing on what you can influence, can make a significant difference over time. The more flexible you become in your thinking, the more resilient you become in your life. This section also invites you to reflect more deeply on your beliefs about trauma. Do you see yourself as someone who is fragile or someone who can adapt? Are you holding on to a past experience in a way that limits your present? What would change if you believe that recovery is not only possible, but natural? These questions are not just theoretical. They are tools to help you reshape your mindset and, ultimately, your life. Main points and actionable lessons. Trauma does not automatically lead to lifelong damage. People respond in different ways. Resilience is more common than we think, and many people recover naturally. Your interpretation and response to an event matter more than the event itself. Shifting from a victim mindset to an active mindset can accelerate healing. Cultural narratives about trauma can sometimes limit your belief in recovery. Action steps. Reflect on a past challenge you overcame and identify what helped you move forward. When facing difficulty, ask, what can I control right now? Practice flexible thinking instead of assuming the worst outcome. Talk about your experiences in a way that focuses on growth, not just pain. Regularly challenge your beliefs about your own strength and adaptability. By rethinking trauma in this way, you begin to see that healing is not a distant goal. It is something already within your reach, waiting to be activated through awareness and action. In The End of Trauma, the biggest myths about trauma and suffering dismantles some of the most widely accepted beliefs that quietly shape how people view pain, recovery, and themselves. One of the most powerful myths is the idea that trauma inevitably causes long-term psychological damage. We are often led to believe that if something deeply painful happens, it will permanently break us, leaving scars that define our identity. But the book argues that this belief is not only inaccurate for many people, it can actually make recovery harder. When someone assumes they are supposed to be damaged, they may start interpreting normal stress reactions, like sadness, anxiety, or confusion, as proof that something is deeply wrong with them. Another major myth is that suffering must be intense and prolonged in order to be real or valid. This creates a strange pressure where people feel they must struggle for a long time to justify their pain. For example, imagine two individuals who go through a similar loss, such as the death of a loved one. One person gradually begins to regain stability after a few months, while the other continues to struggle for years. Society might view the second person as having experienced deeper grief, while quietly questioning the first person's recovery. But in reality, the first person's ability to adapt is not a sign of weakness or denial. It is a sign of resilience. The myth that suffering must last a long time can trap people in unnecessary guilt, making them feel like they are healing too fast or not grieving correctly. The book also challenges a belief that talking about trauma extensively is always necessary for healing. While expressing emotions can be helpful, forcing people to repeatedly relive painful experiences can sometimes reinforce the stress rather than resolve it. Think of a person who constantly revisits a past failure, replaying it in their mind or discussing it in detail again and again. Instead of moving forward, they become stuck in a loop, strengthening the emotional impact of the memory. On the other hand, someone who occasionally reflects on the experience but also focuses on rebuilding their life may recover more effectively. This doesn't mean ignoring pain. It means balancing reflection with forward movement. A relatable example can be seen in everyday situations like job loss. One person might believe, "This has ruined my life and I'll never recover," while another thinks, "This is difficult, but I've handled challenges before and I can figure this out." The first belief reinforces helplessness, while the second opens the door to action and adaptation. Over time, these beliefs shape completely different outcomes. The myth here is not just about trauma itself, but about the stories we tell ourselves after it happens. This section becomes especially practical when you begin to apply it to your own life. The next time you face a difficult situation, notice the assumptions you are making. Are you telling yourself that this experience will define you forever? Are you comparing your recovery to others and judging yourself for not suffering enough or for healing too quickly? Are you stuck in constant analysis instead of taking small steps forward? By identifying these hidden myths, you can start to challenge them. Replace "This will destroy me" with "This is hard, but I can adapt." Replace "I must feel this way for a long time" with "Healing can happen in different ways and at different speeds." Reflect on your own experiences. Have you ever recovered from something faster than you expected? Did you ever feel guilty for moving on? Are there moments where you held on to pain longer because you believed you were supposed to? What would change if you gave yourself permission to heal in your own way, without following a fixed script? Ultimately, this part of the book reveals that many of the obstacles to healing are not just the event themselves, but the beliefs surrounding them. When you let go of these myths, you create space for a more flexible, realistic, and empowering approach to recovery. Main points and actionable lessons. Trauma does not always lead to permanent psychological damage. Suffering does not need to be long-lasting to be valid or meaningful. Healing does not follow a single fixed path or timeline. Constantly reliving trauma is not always helpful and can sometimes reinforce distress. The beliefs you hold about trauma can either support or hinder your recovery. Action steps. Identify and challenge negative assumptions about your own healing process. Allow yourself to recover at your own pace without comparison or guilt. Balance reflection on past experiences with active steps toward the future. Replace limiting beliefs with more flexible and empowering thoughts. Focus on what you can do now rather than what has already happened. By recognizing and questioning these myths, you give yourself the freedom to heal in a way that is natural, effective, and aligned with your own strength and adaptability. In the end of Trauma, the section What is Trauma? Really takes a step back from common assumptions and asks a deceptively simple question: what actually makes an experience traumatic? Most people instinctively define trauma by the event itself, something extreme, painful, or life-threatening. But the book argues that trauma is not just about what happens to you, it's about how your mind and body respond to what happens. Two people can go through the exact same situation and walk away with completely different outcomes. One may feel overwhelmed and stuck, while the other gradually regains balance and continues forward. This doesn't mean one person is stronger or weaker. It means trauma is deeply personal and shaped by perception, context, and adaptability. To understand this better, imagine two individuals involved in a car accident. Both experience the same crash, the same moment of fear, the same physical shock. Yet weeks later, one person is still afraid to drive, constantly replaying the incident, while the other cautiously returns to normal life. The difference lies not in the event, but in how each person processes it. Trauma, as explained in the book, is not a fixed label attached to an experience. It is a dynamic process that evolves over time. This idea is important because it removes the sense of inevitability. Just because something bad happens does not automatically mean it will define your life. Another key insight is that trauma is often misunderstood as a permanent injury, like a broken bone that never fully heals. In reality, the human mind is far more flexible. Think about how the body heals after a physical wound. At first, there is pain, inflammation, and limitation. But gradually, the body repairs itself, sometimes even becoming stronger in the process. Psychological responses can work in a similar way. For example, someone who loses a job may initially feel anxiety and uncertainty, but over time they may develop new skills, explore different opportunities, and build a more fulfilling career. The initial distress was real, but it did not have to become a permanent state. The book also emphasizes that not every intense emotional experience should be labeled as trauma. In modern culture, there is a tendency to use a word broadly, applying it to a wide range of situations. While this can validate people's feelings, it can also create confusion and unnecessary fear. If every difficulty is seen as traumatic, people may begin to view themselves as more fragile than they actually are. Instead, the book encourages a more nuanced understanding. Distress is a natural part of life, and experiencing it does not mean you are damaged. It means you are human. A relatable example can be seen in academic or career setbacks. A student who fails an important exam might initially think, "This is traumatic, I'll never recover from this." But as time passes, they adjust their approach, seek guidance, and eventually improve. What once felt overwhelming becomes a learning experience. Similarly, someone who faces rejection in a relationship might feel deeply hurt, but later gain clarity about what they want and build healthier connections. These situations highlight that the meaning we assign to an event plays a crucial role in shaping whether it becomes a lasting burden or a stepping stone. From a practical standpoint, this section invites you to rethink how you label your own experiences. The next time you face a difficult situation, instead of immediately categorizing it as something that will harm you long-term, pause and observe your response. Ask yourself, what am I feeling right now? Is this reaction temporary, or am I assuming it will last forever? What evidence do I have from my past that I can adapt and recover? By asking these questions, you create space between the event and your interpretation of it. This space is where change becomes possible. You can also apply this by focusing on small, manageable actions after a stressful event. If you feel overwhelmed, instead of trying to solve everything at once, take one step, reach out to someone, gather information, or simply give yourself time to process. These small actions reinforce the idea that you are not powerless. Over time, they build a sense of control and confidence, which are essential for recovery. Reflect on your own life. Have there been moments you once thought would define you forever, but eventually faded in intensity? Are there experiences you labeled as trauma that might actually be part of normal human struggle? How would your perspective shift if you saw yourself as adaptable rather than fragile? What would you do differently if you believed that your current difficulties are temporary and manageable? This section ultimately reframes trauma as something far less deterministic than we often believe. It shows that while painful experiences are real and significant, they do not automatically dictate your future. Your response, your mindset, and your ability to adapt play a far greater role than the event itself. Main points and actionable lessons. Trauma is not defined solely by the event, but by how you respond to it. The same experience can lead to different outcomes for different people. Emotional distress is natural and does not always mean lasting damage. The mind, like the body, has a strong ability to heal and adapt. Overlabeling experiences as trauma can limit your sense of resilience. Action steps. Pause before labeling an experience as permanently damaging. Reflect on past situations where you successfully adapted and recovered. Focus on small, actionable steps to regain control after stress. Separate your immediate emotional reaction from long-term assumptions. Practice viewing challenges as temporary and manageable rather than defining. By understanding what trauma really is, you begin to see that your experiences do not control you as much as you might think. Your response to them does. In The End of Trauma, the section The Myth of Universal Damage directly challenges one of the most widespread and limiting beliefs about human suffering, the idea that traumatic experiences inevitably leave everyone psychologically damaged in the same lasting way. This belief sounds convincing because it feels intuitive. Something bad happens, therefore something inside us must break. But the book reveals that this assumption is not supported by how people actually respond in real life. Instead of a single predictable outcome, there's a wide spectrum of responses. Some people struggle for a long time. Some recover gradually, and many show remarkable resilience much sooner than expected. The crucial insight here is that trauma does not operate like a universal formula. It is not event equals permanent damage. It is far more complex, flexible, and influenced by individual differences. To make this real, imagine two colleagues who both lose their jobs unexpectedly. One person begins to spiral into self-doubt, constantly thinking, "I'm not good enough. This proves I failed." And months later they are still stuck in that loop. The other person feels the same initial shock and disappointment, but after some time starts exploring new opportunities, updating their skills, and eventually finds a better role. The external event is identical, but the internal outcomes are completely different. The myth of universal damage would predict that both individuals should be equally and permanently affected, but reality shows otherwise. This doesn't mean one person is superior. It means human beings are not as fragile or predictable as we often assume. The book also points out that believing in universal damage can actually create harm where it might not have existed. When people are told, directly or indirectly, that a certain experience will leave scars forever, they may begin to interpret their normal emotional reactions as signs of permanent damage. For example, someone who experiences a breakup might naturally feel sadness, confusion, or loneliness. But if they believe that such an event is supposed to cause deep, lasting trauma, they might start thinking, "Something is wrong with me. I'll never be the same again." This belief can trap them in a cycle of fear and self-doubt, prolonging their distress. In contrast, someone who understands that these feelings are temporary and part of a natural adjustment process is more likely to recover and move forward. A powerful real-life type of example can be seen in students facing academic failure. One student fails an important exam and concludes, "This has ruined my future, I'm permanently behind." They carry this belief forward, avoiding challenges and reinforcing their own limitations. Another student fails the same exam but interprets it differently. "This is a setback, but I can learn from it and improve." Over time, this second perspective leads to growth and success. The difference is not the failure itself, but the meaning attached to it. This is exactly what the myth of universal damage overlooks. It ignores the role of interpretation, adaptability, and personal agency. From a practical standpoint, this section encourages you to question the assumptions you carry about your own experiences. When something difficult happens, notice if you are automatically assuming long-term damage. Are you telling yourself that this will define you forever? Are you comparing your reaction to what you think is normal and judging yourself harshly? Instead, try to adopt a more flexible perspective. Remind yourself that people respond to challenges in many different ways, and there is no single correct outcome. You are allowed to struggle, but you are also capable of recovering. To apply this in your daily life, start by reframing your inner dialogue. When faced with a setback, replace thoughts like "this will ruin me" with "this is difficult, but it does not have to define me." Pay attention to small signs of recovery, moments when you feel slightly better, take a positive step, or regain a sense of control. These moments are evidence that you are not permanently damaged. Over time, acknowledging them can strengthen your confidence in your ability to adapt. Reflect on your own experiences. Have you ever gone through something you thought would permanently affect you, but later realized you had moved on? Are there situations where you assumed the worst about your future, only to find that things improved? Are you currently holding onto a belief that a past event has damaged you beyond repair? What would change if you allowed for the possibility that you are more resilient than you think? Ultimately, this section reframes trauma from something that universally breaks people into something that reveals a diversity of human resilience. It shows that while painful experiences are real and can be challenging, they do not carry a guaranteed outcome. Your response is not predetermined, and your future is not fixed by your past. Main points and actionable lessons. Trauma does not lead to the same outcome for everyone. Responses vary widely. The belief in universal damage is a myth that can limit recovery. How you interpret an event plays a major role in shaping its impact. Assuming permanent damage can prolong distress and reduce resilience. Many people naturally recover and adapt over time. Action steps. Challenge automatic thoughts that assume long-term damage after setbacks. Reframe negative beliefs into more flexible and empowering perspectives. Look for evidence in your life that you have adapted and recovered before. Avoid comparing your recovery process to others. Focus on small steps that move you forward rather than on past events. By letting go of the myth of universal damage, you open the door to a more realistic and empowering understanding of yourself, one where your capacity to adapt is stronger than any single experience. In the end of trauma, the section How People Actually Respond to Trauma reveals a truth that contradicts what many of us expect. There is no single, predictable way that humans respond to difficult or painful experiences. Instead of a uniform reaction where everyone becomes deeply and permanently affected, research shows a wide range of responses. Some people experience intense distress for a period of time and then gradually recover. Others maintain a surprising level of stability even during hardship. And a smaller group may struggle for longer durations. What stands out is that resilience, the ability to adapt and continue functioning, is far more common than we tend to believe. This shifts the narrative from trauma breaks people to people respond in diverse and often adaptive ways. To make this more relatable, consider a real-life type of scenario like losing a job. One person might initially feel anxious and uncertain, but still continue with daily routines, apply for new opportunities, and stay socially connected. Another person might withdraw, overthink the situation, and feel stuck for months. A third person might even see the loss as an unexpected opportunity to explore a different career path. All three reactions are human, but they highlight that trauma is not a one-size-fits-all experience. The book emphasizes that these differences are not random. They are influenced by factors like mindset, coping flexibility, social support, and past experiences. One of the most interesting ideas in this section is the concept of flexibility. People who cope well with adversity are not necessarily those who are always strong or always positive. Instead, they are flexible. They know when to confront a problem and when to step back. They can express emotions when needed, but also shift their focus to practical actions. For example, imagine someone going through a breakup. A flexible response might involve allowing yourself to feel sadness and talk about it with a close friend, but also gradually engaging in activities that bring structure and meaning back into your life. In contrast, a rigid response, either suppressing all emotions or constantly dwelling on them, can make recovery more difficult. Another powerful insight is that many people show what researchers call minimal impact resilience, meaning they experience distress but continue functioning relatively well. This can be seen in everyday life. Think of a student who fails an important exam. They might feel disappointed and stressed, but they still attend classes, prepare for the next test, and move forward. Or consider someone dealing with a health scare. They may feel fear, but they continue to take necessary steps, seek treatment, and maintain their responsibilities. These examples show that resilience does not mean the absence of pain. It means the ability to keep going despite it. The book also challenges the idea that there is a correct way to respond to trauma. Many people feel pressure to react in a certain way, either to be visibly distressed or to recover quickly. But in reality, there is no universal script. Your response is valid as long as it helps you adapt and move forward. This realization can be freeing because it removes the need to compare yourself to others or judge your own reactions. From a practical perspective, this section encourages you to observe your own patterns of response. The next time you face a difficult situation, ask yourself, am I being flexible in how I deal with this, or am I stuck in one way of thinking or reacting? Am I allowing myself to feel emotions without letting them completely control my actions? What small step can I take today to maintain stability or move forward? These questions help you become more aware of your coping style and open the door to change. You can apply this in your life by practicing adaptability. For instance, if you notice that you tend to overthink problems, try balancing that with action. Take one small step toward a solution. If you tend to avoid emotions, allow yourself a moment to acknowledge them, but then shift your focus to what you can control. Building a support system is also crucial. Talking to a trusted friend or family member can provide perspective and reduce isolation, which often makes challenges feel heavier than they are. Reflect on your own experiences. How do you usually respond when something difficult happens? Do you lean more toward overthinking, avoidance, or balanced action? Have there been times when you handled a situation better than you expected? What did you do differently in those moments? Are you giving yourself permission to respond in a way that works for you rather than what you think is expected? This section ultimately reveals that human beings are far more adaptable than the common narrative suggests. Trauma does not dictate a single outcome, and your response is not fixed. By understanding how people actually respond, you begin to see that resilience is not a rare trait. It is a natural capacity that can be strengthened with awareness and practice. Main points and actionable lessons. People respond to trauma in diverse ways. There is no single predictable pattern. Resilience is common and often involves maintaining function despite distress. Flexibility in coping is more important than always being strong or positive. There is no correct way to respond to difficult experiences. Awareness of your own response patterns can help you improve how you cope. Action steps. Practice flexible thinking by adjusting your response based on the situation. Balance emotional expression with practical action. Take small steps forward even when you feel overwhelmed. Build and rely on a support system for perspective and encouragement. Reflect on past situations where you adapted well and learn from them. By understanding how people actually respond to trauma, you can move away from rigid expectations and begin to develop a more adaptable, realistic, and empowering approach to handling life's challenges. In The End of Trauma, the section Resilience as a Norm delivers one of the most surprising and empowering ideas in the entire book. Most people are far more resilient than they believe. Contrary to the popular narrative that trauma usually leads to long-term damage, the research presented here shows that the most common human response to adversity is not breakdown, but adaptation. This does not mean people don't feel pain, fear, or sadness. They absolutely do. But it means that, over time, many individuals naturally find ways to stabilize, adjust, and move forward without being permanently defined by what happened. To understand this, think about everyday life rather than extreme scenarios. Consider someone who goes through a difficult breakup. In the beginning, they may feel intense emotional pain, struggle to focus, and question their self-worth. But as days turn into weeks, they begin to rebuild routines, reconnect with friends, and slowly regain a sense of normalcy. They might even come out of the experience with a clearer understanding of what they want in future relationships. This is resilience in action. Not the absence of suffering, but the ability to continue living and adapting despite it. Another relatable example is a student who fails an important exam. Initially, they may feel overwhelmed and believe they've ruined their future. But over time, they reassess their approach, change their study habits, and try again. Eventually, they improve, and the failure becomes a lesson rather than a life-defining moment. What is important here is not the difficulty of the situation, but the fact that recovery happens more often than we give it credit for. The book emphasizes that these kinds of responses are not rare exceptions. They are the norm. One of the reasons this truth is often overlooked is because resilience is quiet. People who recover and move on do not always draw attention to themselves. In contrast, cases where individuals struggle for long periods tend to receive more focus in media and discussions. This creates a distorted perception, making it seem like prolonged suffering is more common than it actually is. As a result, many people underestimate their own ability to cope. They assume that if something bad happens, they will fall apart, even though their past experiences may suggest otherwise. The section also introduces the idea that resilience is not a fixed trait that some people have and others don't. It is a natural capacity that exists in most individuals and can be strengthened over time. Think of it like a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it becomes. Every time you face a challenge and find a way to adapt, even in small ways, you are reinforcing your resilience. For example, managing a stressful day at work, handling a disagreement, or adjusting to a change in plans are all small acts of resilience that often go unnoticed but build your ability to handle bigger challenges. From a practical standpoint, this perspective can transform how you approach difficulties. Instead of assuming that a tough situation will overwhelm you, you can remind yourself that resilience is your default setting. When something goes wrong, rather than asking, "Why is this happening to me?" you can ask, "How can I adapt to this?" This shift in thinking encourages action and reduces feelings of helplessness. It also helps you focus on what you can control rather than what you cannot. To apply this in your own life, start by recognizing and acknowledging your past resilience. Think about challenges you've already overcome, times when you felt stuck or uncertain but eventually found a way forward. These experiences are evidence that you are capable of adapting. Next, focus on maintaining routines during difficult times. Simple actions like sticking to a daily schedule, staying connected with others, and taking care of basic needs can provide stability and support recovery. Finally, practice flexible thinking. Instead of seeing setbacks as permanent failures, view them as temporary obstacles that can be managed. Reflect on your own experiences. Have there been moments when you expected to struggle for a long time but recovered more quickly than you thought? Are you currently underestimating your ability to handle a situation? What small actions can you take today to reinforce your sense of control and stability? How would your approach to challenges change if you truly believe that resilience is your natural state? This section ultimately reframes resilience from something rare and extraordinary into something ordinary and accessible. It shows that the human capacity to adapt is not the exception, it is the rule. And once you begin to see this in your own life, it becomes easier to trust yourself in the face of uncertainty. Main points and actionable lessons. Resilience is the most common response to adversity, not long-term damage. Feeling distress is normal, but it does not prevent recovery. Many people naturally adapt and move forward over time. Resilience is often overlooked because it is quiet and gradual. It is not a fixed trait. It can be developed and strengthened. Action steps. Reflect on past challenges you have overcome to build confidence in your resilience. Maintain daily routines during difficult times to create stability. Focus on what you can control rather than what you cannot. Reframe setbacks as temporary and manageable rather than permanent. Take small, consistent actions to move forward, even when it feels difficult. By understanding that resilience is a norm, you begin to trust in your own ability to handle life's challenges, realizing that strength is not something you need to find. It is something you already have. In The End of Trauma, the section Why Most People Recover Naturally explains a powerful but often overlooked truth. The human mind is designed to adapt, and for many people, recovery is not something extraordinary. It is a natural process. This challenges a common belief that healing always requires long-term struggle, intensive intervention, or complete transformation of one's life. Instead, the book shows that most individuals gradually return to a stable emotional state through everyday coping mechanisms, even after difficult experiences. This does not mean the pain is insignificant. It means the mind has built-in systems that help it process and move forward over time. To understand this, think about how the body heals from a physical injury. When you get a cut, you do not consciously control every step of the healing process. The body naturally begins to repair itself. In a similar way, the mind has its own processes for dealing with stress and emotional pain. For example, after a stressful event like losing a job, a person may initially feel anxious and uncertain. But over time, they begin to adjust their expectations, explore new opportunities, and regain a sense of direction. They might talk to friends, distract themselves with daily activities, or slowly rebuild their confidence. None of these actions may feel dramatic, but together they create a path toward recovery. A relatable example can be seen in someone going through a breakup. In the early days, the emotional intensity can feel overwhelming. They may constantly think about the past and struggle with feelings of loss. But as time passes, their attention naturally shifts. They start focusing on work, hobbies, or social connections. They may meet new people or rediscover parts of themselves they had neglected. Without realizing it, they are moving forward. This gradual shift is not forced. It happens because the mind is constantly trying to restore balance. The book also highlights that everyday life itself plays a major role in recovery. Routine activities such as going to work, studying, exercising, or spending time with others provide structure and a sense of normalcy. These routines act like anchors, preventing people from becoming completely overwhelmed by their emotions. For instance, a student who experiences a major setback might still attend classes, complete assignments, and interact with peers. These actions may seem small, but they help maintain stability and create opportunities for improvement. Another important factor is social connection. Humans are naturally wired to seek support, even in subtle ways. A casual conversation with a friend, a shared laugh, or simply being around others can reduce feelings of isolation. For example, someone dealing with stress at work might not sit down for a deep emotional discussion, but having regular interactions with colleagues or friends can still provide comfort and perspective. These small moments contribute to recovery more than we often realize. What makes this idea especially empowering is that it removes the pressure to fix yourself in a dramatic way. Many people believe that healing requires a major breakthrough or perfect strategy. But the book suggests that recovery often happens through ordinary actions repeated over time. This means you do not need to have everything figured out. You just need to keep moving, even in small steps. From a practical perspective, you can apply this by trusting the process of gradual recovery. When you face a difficult situation, instead of expecting immediate relief, focus on maintaining your daily routines. Continue doing the things that keep your life structured, even if they feel harder than usual. Allow yourself to experience emotions without assuming they will last forever. Engage in activities that shift your focus, such as work, exercise, or hobbies. These actions may seem simple, but they are powerful because they support your mind's natural ability to heal. It is also helpful to notice the small signs of progress. Maybe you think about the situation slightly less than before, or you feel a brief moment of relief during the day. These are indicators that recovery is already happening. Recognizing them can strengthen your confidence and reduce the fear that you are stuck. Reflect on your own experiences. Have you ever gone through something difficult that felt overwhelming at first but became manageable over time? What helped you move forward, even if it seemed small at the moment? Are you currently expecting yourself to recover faster than is realistic, or doubting that you will recover at all? What routines or connections in your life can support you right now? This section ultimately shows that recovery is not something distant or rare. It is a natural process that unfolds through time, supported by your everyday actions and interactions. By understanding this, you can approach challenges with more patience and trust, knowing that your mind is already working toward healing, even when it does not feel like it. Main points and actionable lessons. Most people recover naturally from difficult experiences over time. The mind has built-in mechanisms that support emotional healing. Everyday routines and activities play a key role in recovery. Social connections, even small ones, help reduce stress and isolation. Recovery often happens gradually through small, consistent actions. Action steps. Maintain daily routines to create stability during difficult times. Allow emotions without assuming they will last forever. Engage in activities that provide structure and distraction. Stay connected with others, even through simple interactions. Notice and appreciate small signs of progress in your recovery. By understanding why most people recover naturally, you begin to see that healing is not something you need to force. It is something that is already happening, step by step, as long as you continue to move forward. In The End of Trauma, the section Flexibility, the key to mental strength introduces one of the most important ideas in understanding how people truly cope with adversity. Mental strength is not about being unshakable or constantly positive, but about being flexible in how you respond to different situations. Instead of relying on a single rigid coping style, resilient people adjust their thoughts, emotions, and behaviors depending on what the moment requires. This flexibility allows them to move between facing problems directly and stepping back when needed, between expressing emotions and focusing on practical action, and between reflecting on the past and engaging with the present. To understand this in real life, imagine two people facing the same stressful situation, such as failing an important exam. The first person reacts in a fixed way. They immediately label themselves as a failure, isolate themselves, and repeatedly replay the event in their mind. Because their response is rigid, they remain stuck in the same emotional loop. The second person also feels disappointment, but their response is more flexible. They allow themselves to feel upset for a short time, talk to a friend about it, then shift their focus toward improving their study habits and planning for the next attempt. Over time, the second person recovers more effectively, not because they felt less pain, but because they adapted their response as needed. The book explains that flexibility is powerful because life itself is unpredictable. No single coping strategy works for every situation. For example, in some moments, talking about your feelings can be helpful, such as after a breakup or personal loss. In other moments, constantly analyzing emotion can make things worse, and what you really need is distraction, routine, or action. Think of someone going through job stress. On one day, they might benefit from reflecting on what went wrong and learning from it. On another day, they might need to step away from overthinking and focus on exercise, work tasks, or spending time with family. Flexibility means knowing when to do which. A relatable example can be seen in parenting or caregiving situations. A parent dealing with a difficult child may sometimes need to be strict and set boundaries, while at other times they need to be empathetic and understanding. If they only use one approach, either constant strictness or constant leniency, the situation becomes unbalanced. But if they adapt their behavior based on what the child needs in the moment, the relationship becomes healthier and more stable. The same principle applies internally. Your emotional system also needs balance, not extremes. The book also highlights that rigid thinking often increases suffering. When people believe there's only one correct way to cope, such as always staying strong, always staying positive, or always talking about problems, they limit their ability to adapt. For example, someone who believes they must stay strong and not feel emotions may suppress their feelings until they become overwhelming later. On the other hand, someone who believes they must constantly analyze and express every emotion may become trapped in overthinking. Flexibility breaks this pattern by allowing movement between different coping strategies. From a practical perspective, you can apply this idea by observing your own response patterns. When something stressful happens, ask yourself, am I reacting in the same way every time, even if it is not helping? Could a different response be more effective in this situation? For instance, if you notice that you tend to overthink problems, try shifting to action. Take one small step forward instead of analyzing everything. If you tend to avoid emotions completely, try allowing yourself a short period of reflection or conversation with someone you trust. The goal is not to eliminate any one coping style, but to expand your range of responses. You can also practice flexibility in daily life by experimenting with small adjustments. If you usually deal with stress by isolating yourself, try reaching out to someone. If you usually talk everything through immediately, try giving yourself a quiet moment first before reacting. Over time, these small experiments help you build a more adaptive mindset. Flexibility is not something you either have or don't have. It is something you develop through awareness and practice. Reflect on your own behavior. Do you tend to react to stress in the same way every time? Have there been moments when your usual coping strategy did not work, but a different approach might have helped? Are you allowing yourself enough options when dealing with emotional challenges, or are you stuck in one pattern? What would change if you gave yourself permission to respond differently depending on the situation? This section ultimately reframes mental strength from something rigid and fixed into something dynamic and adaptable. It shows that true resilience is not about never breaking under pressure, but about knowing how to adjust, shift, and respond in ways that keep you moving forward. Main points and actionable lessons. Mental strength is based on flexibility, not rigidity. Different situations require different coping strategies. Over-relying on a single response style can increase suffering. Flexible thinkers adapt between emotion, action, reflection, and distraction. Small changes in response patterns can significantly improve resilience. Action steps. Observe your default reaction to stress and identify patterns. Experiment with alternative coping strategies in different situations. Balance emotional expression with practical action. Avoid labeling one coping style as the only correct method. Practice adjusting your response based on what the situation actually requires. By developing flexibility, you build a form of mental strength that is not fragile or rigid, but adaptable enough to handle the unpredictable nature of life. In The End of Trauma, the section The Problem with Trauma Culture explores how modern society's growing focus on trauma, while often well-intentioned, can sometimes shape the way people understand themselves and their experiences in limiting ways. The book does not deny that trauma is real or that people suffer, but it questions a cultural tendency to interpret a wide range of emotional difficulties through the lens of trauma. In doing so, it suggests that this trauma-centered way of thinking can unintentionally encourage people to see themselves as more fragile, less capable, and more permanently affected than they actually are. To understand this, imagine a person who goes through a stressful breakup. In a trauma-focused mindset, they might immediately label their experience as something deeply damaging, telling themselves that they are broken or scarred for life. This interpretation can make normal emotional reactions like sadness, loneliness, or confusion feel like evidence of long-term psychological injury. But in reality, these reactions are often part of a natural adjustment process. Another person going through the same breakup might view it differently. They recognize the pain, but they also see it as a difficult life experience that they can learn from and move beyond. Over time, this second perspective tends to support faster emotional recovery. The book explains that trauma culture can sometimes create a kind of feedback loop. When people are repeatedly exposed to messages that emphasize damage, vulnerability, and long-term psychological consequences, they may begin to interpret their own experiences through that framework. For example, a student who fails an important exam might start thinking, "This is traumatic, and it will affect me forever," even though, historically, many people recover from academic setbacks and eventually succeed. Similarly, someone experiencing workplace stress might assume that their exhaustion or anxiety is a sign of deep psychological harm, rather than a temporary response to pressure. This doesn't mean their feelings are not real. It means the interpretation of those feelings can influence how long they persist. A relatable real-life example can be seen in everyday social conversations. Imagine a group of friends discussing their challenges. One person says, "I've been through trauma because of my workload," while another simply says, "Work has been stressful, but I'm managing it." Over time, the language we use shapes how we think. If everything becomes trauma, then normal human struggles risk being elevated into something more permanent and defining than they actually are. The book suggests that while naming and validating pain is important, overlabeling experiences as trauma can sometimes reduce people's sense of agency and resilience. Another important point is that trauma culture can unintentionally encourage comparison and identity formation around suffering. People may begin to measure their experiences against others, wondering if their pain is valid enough or severe enough to count. This can lead to two extremes, either minimizing one's own struggles or over-identifying with them. For instance, someone might think, "Others have worse experiences, so I shouldn't feel affected," or alternatively, "This must define who I am now." Both responses can limit the natural process of adaptation and growth. From a practical perspective, this section encourages you to become more aware of how language and cultural narratives influence your thinking. When you go through a difficult experience, notice whether you are immediately labeling it in a way that makes it feel permanent or defining. Instead of automatically framing everything as trauma, try asking, "What exactly am I feeling right now? Is this a normal reaction to a difficult situation? How have I handled similar challenges in the past?" This shift in questioning helps separate immediate emotional experience from long-term identity. You can also apply this by consciously balancing validation with perspective. It is important to acknowledge pain without exaggerating its permanence. For example, instead of saying, "This will damage me forever," you might say, "This is difficult right now, but I can adapt and move forward over time." This does not dismiss your feelings. It places them in a broader, more realistic context. Over time, this kind of thinking supports emotional recovery rather than prolonged distress. Reflect on your own experiences. Have you ever labeled something as more damaging than it later turned out to be? Are there situations where cultural language about trauma influenced how you interpreted your own feelings? Do you tend to define your experiences by their emotional intensity or by how you eventually adapt to them? What would change if you viewed your challenges as part of normal human variation rather than permanent psychological injury? This section ultimately suggests that while trauma awareness has brought important attention to suffering, it is equally important to maintain balance. Understanding pain should not come at the cost of underestimating human resilience. By stepping back from a purely trauma-centered lens, you can develop a more flexible, realistic, and empowering understanding of your own experiences. Main points and actionable lessons. Trauma culture can sometimes overemphasize damage and long-term impact. Not all emotional distress should be labeled as trauma. Language and cultural narratives shape how people interpret their experiences. Over-identifying with trauma can reduce a sense of personal agency. Balanced thinking supports both validation and recovery. Action steps. Be mindful of how you label your emotional experiences. Avoid automatically framing all difficulties as trauma. Separate temporary emotional reactions from long-term identity. Use balanced self-talk that acknowledges pain without exaggerating permanence. Reflect on past experiences where you recovered more than you expected. By understanding the influence of trauma culture, you begin to reclaim a more grounded perspective, one that recognizes suffering without allowing it to define your entire sense of self. In The End of Trauma, the section When Therapy Helps, and when it doesn't, takes a balanced and surprisingly nuanced look at one of the most commonly accepted ideas in modern mental health, that therapy is always a primary or necessary path to healing after distress or trauma. The book does not dismiss therapy. In fact, it acknowledges that therapy can be extremely helpful for many people, but it challenges the assumption that it is always essential or that recovery cannot happen without it. Instead, it presents a more realistic picture. Humans have multiple pathways to healing, and therapy is just one of them, not the only one. To understand this, imagine two people going through similar emotional struggles after a painful breakup. One person decides to enter therapy, where they talk through their emotions, explore patterns, and gain insight into their behavior. Over time, this helps them process their experience and build healthier coping strategies. The second person, however, does not attend therapy. Instead, they rely on friends, daily routines, work, exercise, and personal reflection. Gradually, they also recover and regain emotional stability. Both individuals reach a healthier state, but through different paths. This example highlights a key message of the book. Healing is not a single-track process. The book explains that therapy tends to be most helpful in specific situations, such as when someone is stuck in a cycle of distress, unable to function in daily life, or dealing with unresolved patterns that keep repeating. In these cases, structured support from a trained professional can provide clarity, guidance, and tools for change. For example, someone struggling with long-term anxiety that affects their work and relationships may benefit greatly from therapy because it helps them identify underlying thought patterns and develop coping strategies. In such cases, therapy acts like a guide that helps untangle complex emotional experiences. However, the book also emphasizes that therapy is not always necessary for recovery. Many people naturally adapt over time without formal intervention. Think of someone who experiences stress after losing a job. They may feel overwhelmed at first, but gradually they adjust by seeking new opportunities, restructuring their routine, and leaning on social support. In this case, everyday life itself becomes a mechanism of healing. The danger, the book suggests, is assuming that without therapy, healing is impossible. This belief can unintentionally make people feel dependent or inadequate, even when they are already showing signs of natural resilience. Another important point is that therapy is not one size fits all. The effectiveness of therapy often depends on timing, method, and individual needs. For instance, someone who is actively overwhelmed may find it difficult to process deep emotional work immediately and might first need stabilization through routine, support, or time. On the other hand, someone who is already stabilized may benefit more from deeper reflection and structured therapeutic techniques. This shows that therapy is most effective when it matches the person's current stage of recovery, rather than being applied universally as a fixed solution. A relatable real-life scenario can be seen in students dealing with academic pressure. One student might seek counseling to manage stress and improve study habits, finding it very helpful. Another student might instead recover by adjusting their schedule, improving sleep, and talking with friends or family. Both approaches can lead to improvement, but neither is inherently superior. The key factor is what the individual needs at that moment in their life. From a practical standpoint, this section encourages you to view therapy as a tool rather than a requirement. If you are going through a difficult time, it is important to ask yourself, do I need structured professional support right now, or do I already have resources in my life that are helping me cope? Am I using therapy, if I choose it, as a way to grow, or am I relying on it as the only path to feeling better? These questions help you make more conscious decisions about your healing process rather than assuming a single correct approach. You can also apply this understanding by building a wider support system for yourself. Emotional recovery is often strengthened through multiple sources: friends, family, routines, physical activity, creative expression, and self-reflection. For example, someone recovering from stress might combine regular walks, journaling, conversations with trusted people, and occasional professional support if needed. This combination creates a more flexible and resilient approach to emotional well-being. Reflect on your own experiences. Had you ever recovered from a difficult situation without formal help, simply through time and daily life adjustments? Have there been moments when talking to someone professionally made a meaningful difference? Are you assuming that healing must follow a specific path, or are you open to different ways of recovering? What kind of support actually helps you the most when you are under stress? This section ultimately reframes therapy not as a mandatory step in recovery, but as one of many possible tools. It emphasizes that healing is highly individual, and understanding when therapy helps and when other forms of adaptation are enough can lead to a more flexible, empowered approach to mental well-being. Main points and actionable lessons. Therapy can be helpful, but it is not the only path to recovery. Many people naturally heal through daily life, routines, and social support. Therapy is most effective when matched to a person's specific needs and timing. Over-reliance on therapy as the only solution can reduce perceived self-agency. Healing often involves multiple sources of support, not just one method. Action steps. Evaluate whether you need professional support or already have coping resources. Build a balanced support system including relationships, routines, and self-care. Do not assume therapy is required for every emotional difficulty. Use therapy as a tool for growth, not as the only path to recovery. Reflect on what has helped you recover in the past beyond formal help. By understanding when therapy helps and when it doesn't, you begin to see healing as a flexible process shaped by your needs, your environment, and your ability to adapt. In the end of trauma, the section Debunking PTSD Misconceptions challenges some of the most deeply rooted and widely accepted beliefs about post-traumatic stress disorder and how people are expected to respond to extreme events. One of the central misconceptions addresses the idea that exposure to a traumatic event automatically leads to PTSD in a predictable and uniform way. The book explains that while PTSD is a real and serious condition for some individuals, it is not the inevitable outcome of trauma. In reality, most people who experience highly stressful or even life-threatening situations do not develop long-term psychiatric disorders. This insight is important because it directly contradicts the common assumption that trauma equals permanent psychological injury. To understand this more clearly, imagine two people who survive the same serious car accident. One person may develop lingering anxiety, intrusive thoughts, or avoidance behaviors that interfere with daily life. The other person may feel shaken for a period of time but gradually return to normal functioning, eventually driving again without significant distress. According to common misconceptions, both individuals would be expected to develop PTSD simply because they experienced the same event. However, the book emphasizes that human responses are not uniform, and many people naturally recover without developing chronic symptoms. Another misconception the book addresses is a belief that PTSD symptoms are always severe, visible, and long-lasting. In reality, responses to trauma exist on a spectrum. Some people may experience temporary stress reactions such as difficulty sleeping, heightened alertness, or emotional sensitivity, which gradually fade as they adapt. These reactions are often part of normal recovery rather than signs of disorder. For example, someone who experiences a sudden job loss may feel anxious and uncertain for a few weeks, but over time they adjust to their situation, rebuild confidence, and regain stability. Labeling every intense emotional response as PTSD can create unnecessary fear and may even interfere with natural recovery processes. The book also highlights how cultural narratives and media representations contribute to PTSD misconceptions. Movies and stories often portray trauma survivors as permanently changed individuals who are unable to function normally without long-term struggle. While these portrayals may reflect some real cases, they do not represent the majority of human experiences. This can lead people to over-identify with symptoms or assume they are more affected than they actually are. For instance, someone who feels sadness after a breakup might think, "This must be PTSD," when in reality they are experiencing a normal emotional response to loss. This misinterpretation can increase anxiety and delay natural healing. A real-life type of example can be seen in military or emergency service narratives. While some individuals in high-risk professions do experience PTSD, many others return from stressful situations and continue their lives with resilience and adaptation. They may remember the event, reflect on it, and even feel emotional impact at times, but still maintain overall psychological stability. This demonstrates that exposure alone does not determine outcome. Individual factors such as coping style, support systems, and meaning-making play a major role. From a practical perspective, this section encourages a more careful and balanced way of interpreting your own emotional reactions. When you experience stress after a difficult event, it is important to ask, are these symptoms persistent and interfering with daily life, or are they temporary reactions that are gradually improving? Am I interpreting normal emotional discomfort as something more severe than it actually is? This kind of reflection helps prevent unnecessary self-labeling and reduces the risk of turning temporary distress into a fixed identity. You can also apply this understanding by focusing on your ability to function rather than on isolated emotional moments. For example, even if you feel anxious or sad after a difficult experience, are you still able to complete daily tasks, maintain relationships, or engage in routines? If the answer is yes, this may indicate that you are already in a natural recovery process. Supporting yourself with structure, social connection, and gradual engagement in normal activities can reinforce this recovery. Reflect on your own experiences. Have you ever gone through a difficult situation and later realized that your initial emotional response was stronger than the long-term impact? Do you tend to interpret stress as something more permanent than it actually is? Are there moments where you may have misjudged your own resilience by assuming the worst-case scenario? What would change if you viewed your reactions as temporary adjustments rather than permanent conditions? This section ultimately reframes PTSD not as an automatic consequence of trauma, but as one possible outcome among many. It emphasizes that while some individuals do struggle significantly, many others naturally recover, and understanding this distinction is essential for a more accurate and less fear-driven view of human resilience. Main points and actionable lessons. PTSD is a real condition but not an automatic result of trauma. Most people exposed to stressful events do not develop long-term disorders. Emotional reactions after trauma are often temporary and part of normal recovery. Media and cultural narratives can exaggerate expectations of long-term damage. Functioning and adaptation are more important indicators than isolated symptoms. Action steps. Avoid immediately labeling stress reactions as PTSD or permanent damage. Observe whether your symptoms are improving over time or remaining fixed. Focus on maintaining daily functioning and routines during recovery. Use social support and structure to stabilize emotional responses. Reframe temporary distress as part of natural adaptation rather than identity. By debunking PTSD misconceptions, this section helps you understand that human responses to extreme events are far more varied and adaptive than commonly believed, allowing for a more realistic and empowering view of recovery. In the end of trauma, the section Practical Ways to Build Resilience shifts the focus from theory to action, showing that resilience is not just something you either have or don't have, but something you can actively strengthen through everyday choices and behaviors. The book makes it clear that resilience is built through patterns of thinking, responding, and living that gradually shape how effectively you handle stress and adversity. Instead of relying on one dramatic solution or mindset shift, resilience develops through small, consistent practices that train your mind to adapt rather than break under pressure. One of the key ideas in this section is that resilience begins with how you interpret challenges. For example, imagine two people who both receive critical feedback at work. One immediately thinks, "I'm not good enough, I always fail," and withdraws emotionally. The other initially feels disappointed but then thinks, "This is uncomfortable, but I can learn from it and improve." Over time, the second person builds confidence and adaptability, while the first becomes more discouraged. The difference is not the event itself, but the interpretation of it. The book emphasizes that learning to reframe situations is one of the most powerful tools for building resilience. Another practical strategy discussed is maintaining stability through routines. When life feels uncertain, structure becomes a grounding force. Consider someone going through a stressful period such as financial instability or relationship difficulties. If they continue waking up at a consistent time, eating regularly, exercising, and maintaining basic responsibilities, they create a sense of normalcy that supports emotional balance. These routines may seem simple, but they act as anchors that prevent emotional overwhelm from taking over completely. Without structure, stress can feel chaotic. With structure, it becomes more manageable. The book also highlights the importance of flexible coping strategies. This means not relying on a single way of dealing with stress, but being able to adjust depending on the situation. For instance, after a difficult argument, one moment might require reflection and emotional processing, while another moment might require distraction, physical activity, or engaging in work. A person who can shift between these approaches is better equipped to handle different types of challenges. Think of it like using different tools for different tasks. No single tool works for everything. Social connection is another essential component of resilience. Humans are not designed to cope with stress in isolation. Even simple interactions, talking to a friend, sharing a meal, or receiving a message of support, can significantly reduce emotional strain. For example, someone dealing with a personal setback might feel overwhelmed when alone, but gain perspective after speaking with someone they trust. The book emphasizes that support does not always need to be deep or structured. Even casual connection can help regulate emotional intensity. Another important point is learning to tolerate discomfort without being overwhelmed by it. Life inevitably includes moments of uncertainty, failure, and emotional pain. Resilience is not about avoiding these experiences, but about learning to move through them. For example, a student who fails an exam may feel intense disappointment initially, but instead of shutting down, they can allow the feeling to exist while still taking steps to improve their study habits. This ability to feel discomfort without becoming stuck in it is a core aspect of resilience. From a practical standpoint, the section encourages you to actively build these habits into your daily life. Start by paying attention to how you respond to stress. Do you tend to overreact, avoid, or adapt? Begin experimenting with small changes. If you usually overthink problems, try shifting toward action, even if it is a small step. If you tend to suppress emotions, allow yourself short moments of reflection or conversation. If you feel overwhelmed, return to structure, sleep, meals, movement, and routine. You can also build resilience by practicing self-awareness. When something difficult happens, pause and ask, what is my immediate reaction? Is this response helping me move forward or keeping me stuck? What would a more flexible response look like in this situation? These questions help create space between emotion and action, which is where resilience begins to grow. Reflect on your own life. When was the last time you handled a difficult situation better than expected? What did you do differently in that moment? Do you have routines that support you during stressful times, or do you tend to lose structure when things get difficult? Are you relying too heavily on one coping method, or are you open to adjusting your approach depending on the situation? How would your life change if you trusted your ability to adapt more consistently? This section ultimately shows that resilience is not built in moments of crisis alone, but in the small, repeated choices you make every day. It is shaped by how you think, how you respond, and how you structure your life around challenges rather than avoiding them. Main points and actionable lessons. Resilience is developed through consistent daily habits, not single events. How you interpret challenges strongly influences your emotional response. Routines provide stability and reduce emotional overwhelm. Flexible coping strategies improve your ability to handle different situations. Social connection plays a key role in emotional recovery and balance. Action steps. Build simple daily routines to create stability during stress. Practice reframing negative thoughts into more balanced perspectives. Experiment with different coping methods depending on the situation. Stay connected with others, even through small interactions. Pause during stress to evaluate whether your response is helping or limiting you. By applying these practical strategies, you gradually strengthen your ability to adapt, making resilience a natural part of how you navigate life rather than a skill you only use during crisis. In The End of Trauma, the section Adapting to Stress and Adversity focuses on one of the most fundamental human abilities, the capacity to adjust to difficult, unexpected, or painful life circumstances without becoming permanently overwhelmed by them. The book emphasizes that stress and adversity are not unusual disruptions to human life. They are a normal part of it. What matters most is not whether stress occurs, but how individuals adapt in response to it. Adaptation is presented not as a rare skill reserved for a few strong individuals, but as a natural psychological process that most people engage in continuously, often without even realizing it. To understand this idea in a practical way, imagine someone who suddenly loses their job. The first reaction is usually emotional shock, followed by worry about finances, identity, and the future. For a short time, it may feel like everything is unstable. But as days and weeks pass, adaptation begins to take place. The person starts organizing a routine, updating their resume, reaching out to contacts, or exploring new opportunities. Even small actions like waking up at a consistent time or maintaining daily structure become part of the adaptation process. The stress does not disappear instantly, but the person gradually adjusts to the new reality and begins to regain a sense of control. The book highlights that adaptation is not about eliminating stress, but about integrating it into your life in a way that allows you to continue functioning. For example, consider a student who fails an important exam. At first, the failure may feel overwhelming, leading to disappointment and self-doubt. However, over time, the student begins to adjust their study methods, seek help, and plan for improvement. The experience becomes part of their learning journey rather than a permanent setback. This shift from "this is the end of my progress" to "this is part of my growth process" is a key aspect of adaptation. Another important insight is that adaptation often happens gradually and quietly. It is not always dramatic or immediately noticeable. A person dealing with grief, for instance, may not suddenly feel better, but they slowly begin to re-engage with daily life, eating regularly, reconnecting with friends, or returning to hobbies. These small steps signal that adaptation is already taking place, even if emotional pain is still present. The book emphasizes that people often underestimate their own ability to adapt because they expect recovery to feel instant or complete, when in reality it unfolds over time. A relatable example can be found in everyday life stress, such as moving to a new city. Initially, everything feels unfamiliar: new environment, new routines, and possibly feelings of loneliness or uncertainty. But gradually, the person begins to learn their surroundings, establish routines, find familiar places, and build social connections. What once felt overwhelming becomes normal. This process shows that adaptation is not about avoiding discomfort, but about becoming familiar with it until it no longer dominates your experience. The book also explains that flexibility plays a crucial role in adaptation. People who adapt well are not those who resist change the most, but those who are able to adjust their thinking and behavior when circumstances shift. For example, someone who experiences a sudden change in financial situation might initially feel stress, but then shift their focus toward budgeting, finding additional income sources, or adjusting lifestyle expectations. This ability to pivot mentally and behaviorally is what allows adaptation to take place effectively. From a practical perspective, this section encourages you to recognize adaptation as something you are already doing, even in small ways. When you face stress, instead of assuming that you are stuck or unable to cope, observe the small adjustments you are naturally making. Are you still maintaining parts of your routine? Are you seeking solutions, even in small steps? Are you gradually adjusting your expectations or behavior? These are all signs of adaptation in progress. You can also apply this understanding by intentionally supporting your own adaptation process. When something difficult happens, focus on what can be adjusted rather than what is completely out of your control. For instance, if you are under stress, you might not be able to change the situation immediately, but you can adjust your daily structure, reduce unnecessary pressure, or break problems into smaller steps. These small changes help your mind shift from a state of overwhelm to a state of manageability. Reflect on your own experiences. Have there been times when something initially felt unbearable, but over time became easier to handle? What helped you adjust in those situations? Are you currently underestimating your ability to adapt to a challenge? Do you tend to expect immediate resolution instead of gradual adjustment? What small changes could you make today to support your own adaptation process? This section ultimately reframes stress and adversity not as exceptions to normal life, but as conditions that activate your natural ability to adapt. It shows that adaptation is not something you wait for. It is something you are already doing, step by step, even in difficult moments. Main points and actionable lessons. Stress and adversity are normal parts of life, not rare disruptions. Adaptation happens gradually through small behavioral and emotional adjustments. People often underestimate their ability to adapt because recovery is not immediate. Flexibility in thinking and behavior is essential for effective adaptation. Small routine actions play a major role in regaining stability. Action steps. Focus on small, manageable adjustments during stressful periods. Maintain basic routines to support emotional stability. Recognize signs of natural adaptation in your daily behavior. Shift focus from problems you cannot control to actions you can take. Reflect on past experiences where you successfully adapted to change. By understanding how adaptation works, you begin to see that even in moments of stress and uncertainty, your mind is already working towards stability and recovery, often more effectively than you realize. In The End of Trauma, the section Moving Forward Without Being Defined by Trauma explores a deeply important idea. While painful experiences can influence us, they do not have to define who we are or determine the direction of our entire lives. The book challenges the assumption that once someone goes through a traumatic or highly stressful event, their identity becomes permanently shaped by it. Instead, it emphasizes that human identity is flexible, evolving, and far broader than any single experience. Trauma may become part of a person's story, but it does not need to become the entire story. To understand this more clearly, imagine two people who go through the same difficult breakup. The first person begins to identify strongly with the experience, constantly thinking of themselves as someone who was abandoned or someone who was broken by love. This identity becomes central to how they see themselves, influencing future relationships and decisions. The second person also feels pain and sadness, but over time begins to integrate the experience differently. They might think, "That was a painful chapter, but I learned a lot about myself and what I need." This person still remembers the experience, but it does not define their identity. Both experience the same event, but their sense of self takes very different paths. The book explains that when people become overly identified with trauma, they risk limiting their future growth. For example, someone who experiences a job loss might begin to see themselves as unemployable or not good enough, even if their skills and potential remain unchanged. This kind of identity-based thinking can create self-fulfilling limitations, where past experiences shape future behavior in restrictive ways. In contrast, someone who views the same job loss as a setback rather than a defining trait is more likely to explore new opportunities, develop new skills, and rebuild confidence. A relatable real-life example can be seen in academic failure. A student who fails an important exam might internalize it as proof that they are not intelligent enough. If this belief becomes part of their identity, it can discourage them from trying again. However, another student might view the same failure as feedback, something that highlights areas for improvement rather than defining their ability. Over time, this second student is more likely to grow, adapt, and eventually succeed. The difference lies not in the event, but in whether the experience becomes an identity or simply a moment in time. The book also highlights how society can unintentionally reinforce trauma-based identity. When people are repeatedly told that they are trauma survivors or that their past experiences define them, it can sometimes strengthen the belief that they are permanently shaped by what happened. While acknowledging pain is important, the book encourages a balance, recognizing experiences without allowing them to dominate identity. For example, someone who has gone through a difficult health crisis may carry that experience with them, but they can still see themselves as a whole person with multiple roles, strengths, and possibilities, not just as someone defined by illness. From a practical standpoint, this section encourages you to actively separate your experiences from your identity. When reflecting on past events, ask yourself, am I describing what happened, or am I defining who I am because of it? This distinction is powerful. One keeps the experience in context, the other turns it into a permanent label. By practicing this awareness, you begin to loosen the grip that past experiences may have on your self-image. You can apply this in your daily life by consciously expanding how you describe yourself. Instead of saying, "I am someone who failed," you might say, "I experienced failure in this situation, but I am still learning and growing." Instead of thinking, "I am damaged because of what happened," you can reframe it as, "I went through something difficult, and I am still evolving beyond it." These subtle shifts in language can gradually reshape how you perceive yourself and your future. It is also helpful to actively invest in new experiences that reinforce your broader identity. Engaging in new hobbies, building skills, forming new relationships, or taking on new responsibilities can remind you that you are more than any single past event. Each new experience adds depth to your identity, making it less centered around a single point of pain. Reflect on your own life. Are there experiences that you still use to define yourself today? Do you find yourself referring to past difficulties as proof of who you are? How would your behavior change if you saw those experiences as part of your history, but not your identity? What new aspects of yourself have you discovered that are unrelated to your past struggles? This section ultimately reframes trauma not as an identity, but as an experience that can be integrated into a much larger and evolving sense of self. It shows that while the past is real and meaningful, it does not have to determine who you become. Main points and actionable lessons. Trauma does not have to define your identity or future. Over-identifying with past experiences can limit personal growth. Identity is flexible and shaped by many experiences, not just one. Language and self-description strongly influence self-perception. Expanding experiences helps build a broader, healthier sense of self. Action steps. Separate what happened to you from who you are. Reframe self-talk from identity-based labels to experience-based descriptions. Engage in new activities that reinforce different aspects of your identity. Avoid defining yourself solely by past negative events. Reflect regularly on how your self-image is evolving over time. By moving forward without being defined by trauma, you begin to reclaim your identity as something dynamic, open, and shaped by growth rather than limited by the past. In the end of trauma, the section A New Way of Thinking About Trauma brings together the core message of the book and challenges a traditional, often fear-driven way people understand emotional pain and difficult life experiences. Instead of viewing trauma as something that inevitably damages a person in a permanent or uniform way, this section invites a broader and more realistic perspective. Trauma is not a fixed outcome, but a complex process shaped by interpretation, adaptation, context, and time. The book emphasizes that the old narrative, where trauma automatically equals lifelong psychological injury, is not only incomplete but often misleading. A new way of thinking encourages us to see human beings as naturally adaptive, capable of recovery, and far more resilient than commonly assumed. To make this idea more relatable, imagine two individuals who experience the same major life disruption, such as losing their home due to unexpected financial difficulties. In the traditional trauma-focused perspective, both individuals might be expected to suffer equally and permanently. However, in reality, their responses may differ significantly. One person might initially feel overwhelmed and uncertain, but gradually rebuild stability by finding temporary housing, seeking support, and planning their next steps. The other might struggle for longer, feeling stuck and hopeless. The key insight is that the outcome is not predetermined by the event itself, but shaped by how each person interprets and responds to it over time. The book highlights that this new way of thinking about trauma shifts the focus away from labeling people and toward understanding processes. Instead of asking, what is wrong with this person because of what happened? The question becomes, how is this person responding, adapting, and moving forward? This subtle shift has powerful implications. For example, someone experiencing anxiety after a stressful event might no longer immediately assume they are traumatized in a fixed sense, but instead recognize that they are going through a natural stress response that can evolve. This perspective reduces fear and opens the door to recovery rather than reinforcing a sense of damage. A real-life type of scenario can be seen in career setbacks. A person who is passed over for promotion might initially interpret the situation as a personal failure that defines their abilities. However, with a new way of thinking, they might instead view it as feedback about timing, skill development, or organizational fit. This shift allows them to take constructive action, improving skills, seeking mentorship, or exploring new opportunities, rather than becoming stuck in self-defeating narratives. The experience becomes part of a larger developmental process rather than a defining psychological wound. Another important aspect of this new framework is understanding variability in human responses. The book emphasizes that there is no single correct way to respond to adversity. Some people recover quickly, some take longer, and others move through phases of adjustment. All of these responses are normal. For example, after a breakup, one person may feel intense emotional pain for a short period and then gradually move on, while another may take longer to rebuild emotional stability. Neither response indicates permanent damage. They simply reflect different coping pathways. From a practical standpoint, this section encourages you to actively challenge outdated or rigid beliefs about trauma. When you experience something difficult, instead of immediately labeling it as something that will permanently define you, pause and ask, how am I responding right now? Is this response part of a natural adjustment process? What evidence do I have that I can adapt over time? This type of questioning helps shift your mindset from fear and permanence to flexibility and possibility. You can apply this in your own life by consciously reframing how you interpret challenges. Instead of thinking in absolute terms like "this will ruin me" or "I am damaged," try shifting to more adaptive thinking such as "this is difficult right now, but I can adjust and learn from it." Pay attention to how your thoughts evolve over time rather than locking yourself into a single interpretation in the moment. Also, observe how your behavior changes naturally, how you continue routines, seek solutions, or regain stability even during stressful periods. These are signs of your mind working toward recovery. Reflect on your own experiences. Have there been moments in your life when something felt overwhelming at first but became manageable with time? Do you tend to interpret difficult experiences as permanent states or temporary phases? Are you more focused on labeling your experiences or understanding how you are adapting to them? What would change if you trusted your ability to adjust more than your initial emotional reactions? This section ultimately presents a powerful shift in perspective. Trauma is not a fixed identity or guaranteed outcome, but a dynamic experience shaped by how humans naturally respond to adversity. By adopting this new way of thinking, you begin to see yourself not as someone defined by what happens to you, but as someone actively capable of responding, adapting, and moving forward. Main points and actionable lessons. Trauma is not a fixed outcome. It is a dynamic and adaptive process. Human responses to adversity vary widely and are all potentially normal. Shifting focus from labeling to understanding responses improves recovery. Interpretation of events strongly influences emotional outcomes. People naturally adapt over time, even after significant challenges. Action steps. Replace fixed labels with process-based thinking about your experiences. Observe how your reactions change over time instead of assuming permanence. Challenge thoughts that define you based on a single event. Focus on adaptability and learning rather than self-judgment. Practice asking reflective questions about your current state and progress. By embracing this new way of thinking about trauma, you begin to see life not as a series of permanent psychological injuries, but as an ongoing process of adaptation, growth, and change. In the end of trauma, the section Hope, Strength, and Human Adaptability brings the entire message of the book into a deeply empowering conclusion. No matter how difficult life becomes, human beings are fundamentally built with a capacity to adapt, recover, and continue forward. This section shifts the focus away from fear-based interpretations of trauma and instead highlights a more grounded and realistic source of confidence, hope that is not based on denial of pain, but on evidence of human resilience. It emphasizes that strength is not about never breaking under pressure, but about the ability to adjust, rebuild, and find new ways to move through life even after disruption. To understand this idea more clearly, imagine someone who experiences a major setback, such as losing a long-term relationship or facing a serious financial crisis. In the moment, it may feel like everything has collapsed, and the future may seem uncertain or even frightening. However, as time passes, something subtle but powerful begins to happen. The person starts to re-establish routines, reconnect with supportive people, and slowly rebuild a sense of direction. They may not notice it immediately, but their thoughts begin to shift from "I cannot handle this" to "I am figuring this out step by step." This gradual shift is the essence of human adaptability in action. The book emphasizes that hope is not a passive feeling where everything magically becomes better. Instead, it is an active process grounded in the recognition that change is always possible. For example, consider a student who fails an important academic milestone. Initially, they may feel discouraged and question their abilities, but over time, through repeated effort, feedback, and small improvements, they begin to rebuild confidence. Eventually, what once felt like a defining failure becomes just one part of their learning journey. Hope, in this sense, is not about ignoring difficulty but about trusting in the process of adaptation. Another important idea in this section is that strength is often invisible in the moment. People tend to associate strength with dramatic displays of courage or emotional control, but in reality, it is often quiet and gradual. For instance, someone dealing with grief may not feel strong in the traditional sense. They may feel sadness, confusion, or emptiness, yet every day they continue to get up, take care of responsibilities, and slowly re-engage with life. These small actions are powerful expressions of strength, even if they do not feel significant in the moment. A relatable real-life example can be seen in career transitions. Imagine someone who unexpectedly loses their job after many years in the same position. At first, the situation may feel destabilizing, as if their identity and future security have been shaken. But over time, they begin to adapt, updating their skills, exploring new industries, and discovering opportunities they may not have considered before. What initially felt like an ending gradually becomes a transition into something new. This is human adaptability working quietly in the background, even during uncertainty. The book also highlights that adaptability is not something reserved for exceptional individuals. It is a shared human trait. Everyone has experienced it in some form, often without recognizing it. Think about times when your life changed unexpectedly, moving to a new place, adjusting to a new environment, recovering from a personal disappointment, or adapting to new responsibilities. In each case, even if the process was uncomfortable, you eventually found ways to adjust. This pattern reveals that adaptability is not rare, it is constant. From a practical perspective, this section encourages you to actively recognize and trust your own capacity for adaptation. When facing challenges, instead of focusing only on what is lost or uncertain, begin to ask, what is still possible here? What small steps can I take to move forward? How have I adapted to past difficulties, even when I thought I couldn't? These questions help shift attention from helplessness to possibility. You can also apply this by deliberately noticing moments of progress, no matter how small. Recovery and adaptation often happen in subtle stages. Returning to routines, feeling slightly more stable, or regaining interest in activities. Recognizing these moments reinforces the understanding that change is already happening. Additionally, maintaining basic structure in daily life, sleep, activity, social interaction, and responsibilities can significantly support the natural process of adaptation. Reflect on your own life. Have there been times when you thought you would not recover from a situation, but eventually did? What helped you move forward during those times? Are you currently underestimating your ability to adapt to your present challenges? Do you notice your progress, or are you only focusing on difficulties? What would change if you truly believe that adaptation is already happening within you, even right now? This section ultimately reframes hope, strength, and adaptability not as abstract ideals, but as lived human realities. It shows that even in the face of uncertainty, people are not defined by their struggles, but by their ongoing ability to adjust, grow, and continue moving forward. Main points and actionable lessons. Hope is active and grounded in the human ability to adapt over time. Strength is often quiet, gradual, and visible through daily persistence. Human adaptability is a universal trait, not limited to a few individuals. Recovery often happens in small, unnoticed steps. Focusing on possibility helps shift attention away from helplessness. Action steps. Recognize and trust your natural ability to adapt to change. Focus on small, consistent steps rather than immediate resolution. Maintain daily routines to support emotional and psychological stability. Acknowledge small signs of progress in your recovery process. Reflect on past experiences where you successfully adapted to difficulty. By understanding hope, strength, and human adaptability in this way, you begin to see that no matter how difficult a moment may feel, your capacity to move forward is already present within you, continuously working even when it does not feel obvious. As we come to the end of this audiobook summary of the end of trauma, remember the key message. Trauma is not a fixed outcome. Resilience is a norm, and most people naturally adapt and recover over time in their own unique way. You've learned that how we interpret experiences matters more than the events themselves, that flexibility is a true foundation of mental strength, and that hope is built on our everyday ability to adjust, grow, and move forward. If this video helped you see your own experiences in a new way, take a moment to reflect on it and apply even one idea from this summary in your life today. And if you want more powerful book summaries like this that can change the way you think and live, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and stay connected for more content from Visual Books.